Hello everybody, Weegee here, and let's talk about episode 11 of Ice Queendom, Light in Darkness, which, as I predicted, is the last episode in this dream arc, with the final episode likely going to be an epilogue. That maybe sets up a sequel show that takes place sometime during season 2 of Rwby. But before we can talk about that, let's talk about this episode, because there's one scene I really want to talk about, so let's get started. Episode 11 starts with the purple flames of Blake's nightmare spreading and enveloping Weiss's kingdom. The animation on the flames is amazing. The way the black and purple flames blend together is really cool. This sight actually made me a little sad as we see the kingdom Weiss built being destroyed. Though now that I think about it, given some information we get later, this scene is even more depressing. After this, we get two short scenes, one of Yang trying to fight the statue, and another of Jean attempting and failing to use his sword, though he does manage to do some damage to the knight by accident, which is very Volume 1 Jean. Then it switches over to the fight between Weiss and Blake, who is throwing more of the history of oppression at Weiss. So there was something important talked about by Blake in the last episode that I didn't discuss. It's brought up more here as well, which is the actual context of the history Blake is talking about. In the last episode, Blake mentioned that they used the Faunus in a war. I'm assuming that the war in question is the Great War, the one that happened 80 years before canon. It made me wonder how they used the Faunus. Then I remembered that in the first volume, they briefly talked about this war in the scene where Jean and Cardin get in trouble. They said the Faunus had the advantage because of their night vision. So I'm wondering if, kind of like in the American Civil War, where they granted slaves freedom and then recruited them into the army, if they did the same thing to the Faunus. Because Blake also mentions that her predecessors were slaves. It wouldn't be that big of a stretch to think that this American company used American history to influence their world's history. The possible influence shows even more, as she also mentions that they were driven from their homeland, much like the Native Americans in real life. And much like the Native Americans, they were stuck on a reservation of sorts, with the Faunus being given, but in actuality it was probably more like forced relocation, to the island of Menagerie. Trying to put all the Faunus on an island in which the name means a collection of wild animals kept in captivity for exhibition is honestly a special kind of racism, because you know that somebody named that island for that specific reason. I could probably find more historical simulators, but that seems like a video for another time. After this, Blake goes into what I think is the rationalization of hating people who don't hate Faunus. She says that you don't think we are worth hating, and talks about being condescending. Weiss defends herself once again, saying that it wasn't her who did any of this, acknowledges the problems with the Schnee Dust Company, and then talks about her dream to restore the Schnee name. This is when Blake's plan really starts to work, as Weiss begins to realize something is wrong. Though the realization is that Blake is possessed by something. I love that Weiss is so quick to realize that Blake has been possessed, but not so quick to realize that she as well has been possessed. A bit of pride there. After all, she would never get possessed, she's a Schnee. She does realize something is wrong with her though. After the opening, we cut back to Ruby's battle with Nightmare Grim, which isn't going well. We get another glimpse at Weiss's gown, which is looking even more frayed than before, with the front of the dress portion almost completely gone. I love the way they represent how much time Weiss has left with the condition of her dress. It's a really nice detail. Ruby recalls Weiss's words, before we cut to Yang, who is also faring poorly in her battle against the Nicholas statue. But then the Nicholas statue makes the crucial mistake of not knocking Yang out in one hit, also yeeting some Faunus, as Yang activates her semblance, smashing one of its arms before, in a really holy shit animation moment, rides up the statue with her hair blazing and shoots a hole in the jaw of the statue before driving through it with her motorcycle. And like I said, holy shit, this scene was epic. The way they animated her blazing hair was stunning. I loved that she landed the finishing blow with her motorcycle. That was really cool as well. After she goes through the statue, we get the scene I've been waiting for months, as Yang bears witness to one of Weiss's memories, and we finally get a scene between Weiss and her grandfather, confirming what their relationship was, and it was exactly what I was hoping for. Let's go through that scene. A 4 to 5-year-old Weiss is sitting with Nicholas in their garden, talking. Weiss talks about how the mansion looks like a castle, that people say Nicholas built it, and how they essentially treat him like a king. He tells her that his joy doesn't come from being treated like a king, but from helping people. That one day she may need to leave this house, how the Schnee family is a castle protecting her, and that eventually she will need to become a castle to protect others. That doing so will make the Schnee name and herself proud. Weiss asks if she should build a castle, like he did, and he laughs and responds she should build the best castle in her heart with her friends. And holy crap, everything makes so much more sense now. But before we talk about that, let's talk about the actual scene. I've been waiting for forever to get a scene with the grandfather, and it didn't disappoint. Would have liked to see more, of course, but we could get more in the next episode. But either way, I fucking loved this scene. Watching the conversation with them was absolutely adorable. You can really see how much Weiss looks up to her grandfather, and how much his words influenced her life. But in a way, this scene is also very melancholic, as you know that he is going to die, and you can tell how much it's going to hurt Weiss. This memory makes Weiss's dream world make so much more sense. This is the castle, the kingdom that her grandfather told her to build in her heart. Yang and Blake being inside the actual castle makes a lot of sense, as they are her friends. She built a castle with her friends. Her being a royalty figure is because if the people viewed her grandfather as a king, and she as his heir, that would make her a queen after his death. Where she got her desire to become a huntress makes more sense as well. In Volume 2, Weiss talks about how as soon as she knew she could fight, she knew it was her duty to protect people. And what was her grandfather's greatest joy? Well, helping people. So naturally, a young Weiss, who appears to have looked up to him, inherited that desire. She also says that she will eventually become a castle to protect others. Huntsmen, in a way, are a castle that protects the people from the Grimm. So naturally, she was drawn to that. Her desire to fix the shitty name also comes from her relationship with her grandfather. She saw how the people treated her grandfather and treated the shitty name before her father took over. They viewed him as a king. She wanted to restore the name back to how it was viewed when her grandfather was in charge. He also told her that she would make the shitty name proud, so that's another reason for her to restore the name. She didn't want to let her grandfather down. She felt much like her grandfather did, that she needed to leave her home to become a person who could help people, to find herself. Her grandfather was the nurture that shaped Weiss into the person who she would become. I wonder if we're going to get a scene between Weiss and Yang talking about her grandfather. After all, I'm assuming that she is the only one that saw this. It was really satisfying watching this scene, as it means that I was right in my Weiss and Neo video, when I talked about the importance of Weiss's grandfather to her. If you want to check that video out, I'll leave it in the description below. Back to the episode, and we see the end of the fight between Jacques and Jean. The ending of which is very reminiscent of the way he beats the Ursa in Volume 1, with Pure and the Tiny Weisses guiding his blade to hit Jacques, destroying the Grimm controlling him, fitting way for Jean to win, and a nice callback to Volume 1. They don't have long to celebrate, as they have to run as the Nicholas statue begins to collapse, the top of which lands next to Weiss, who is devastated by it. You can really hear the sadness in her voice, before that sadness turns to anger as she blames Blake for it. Then we switch over to Rwby's fight again. We finally figures out what Weiss's message was. I guess the real nightmare has been hiding in Rwby's shadow. So either it hid itself in Rwby's shadow when it infected her to better hide itself as it knew they now knew where it was at, or the core of Weiss's heart has always been Rwby. As I'm pretty sure that Shion mentioned that the nightmare hides itself in the deepest part of the victim's mind or heart. If so, that's a big win for White Rose fans in this sideshow that has no bearing on the actual show. Though Rwby being the core of Weiss's heart, when they have known each other for like 2 weeks, would be a little weird, so I'm assuming it's probably the first part. But if it's the second part, I wouldn't be too mad about it, honestly. So maybe the reason that Rwby is the core is because she in a way reminds her of herself, or maybe even her grandfather, as they both hold that pure desire to help people. Rwby gets captured by the Grimm, and in desperation activates her silver eyes, something she doesn't question at all. This allows her to kill the Grimm, saving Weiss. We cut back to the fight between Weiss and Blake, where the vines surrounding Weiss break due to the Grimm being dead. Then we switch to Shion, who manages to contain the nightmare that comes out of a hole in Weiss's throat. I just want to say that the holes that they come out very much give me Bleach Hollow vibes, with Weiss clearly being Ukiura based on the spot of her hole. Unlike with Jean's nightmare, they managed to completely destroy Weiss's nightmare Grimm, due to the damage done by Rwby's silver eyes, assumedly. We cut back to Blake, whose nightmare form is going out of control, as more black flames begin to consume Weiss's kingdom. Then we get a scene with normal Weiss, who is in the dorm room, when Rwby appears, and they talk about how Weiss felt lonely even with 5 people in her family. This due to the death of her grandfather, who it appears was the only one she was close to as a child, with her not being really close to her sister till she was older, and even then Winter was probably gone a lot. Rwby asks if they can be friends, and Weiss smiles, so Weiss has now accepted Rwby as her friend. Rwby wakes up and we see Weiss's dress again, completely restored. They've done it. Weiss is safe. A glyph transports Rwby to Weiss, who wakes up as her normal self. Rwby hugs her and Weiss is very confused about what's going on. Why is Rwby hugging her? And why is she wearing a strange outfit? I absolutely love that Weiss has no recollection of what is going on, as it makes her reactions to everything hilarious, but it also makes sense. She's technically been asleep this whole time. Yang gives them a heads up that Blake is possessed by a Grimm. Watching Weiss put the pieces together and come to the wrong conclusion was amazing. Like, on one hand, she figured it out rather quickly, showing off how smart she is. On the other hand, it's like her mind couldn't comprehend that it might be her who was possessed first. She goes, Blake has been possessed by a nightmare, so this is a dream world. Then it looks like she might be onto what's happened, but instead she comes to the conclusion that this is Blake's dream world, and she is disappointed in herself for not noticing something is wrong with Blake, completely ignoring the fact that she can't remember anything of what's going on. I don't know if this is the conclusion a normal person would come to, or if Weiss's pride just led her to ignoring the more obvious answer. Either way, it was funny as hell. Before the fight starts, we get a scene where Shion states that the nightmare has dug deeper into Blake's mind than anticipated. Then the battle begins, with Weiss and Rwby fighting the White Fang while Yang fights Blake, which is a fight I never thought I would see, so that's cool. Yang manages to land a solid blow on Blake, breaking part of her mask, which gives Blake the chance to break free from her nightmare and her inner Adam. With the help of Yang, she manages to escape the nightmare. Honestly, I'm a little disappointed with this. I know what they were going for. Yang saved her partner, go Bumblebee, all that jazz, yeah. But with all the talk about how Weiss and Blake are mirrors of each other, and how they cancel each other out, I think it should have been Weiss to give her that final push to overcome her inner Adam. I mean, who better to help her overcome her hate for the Shindesu company than the heiress of said company? It feels like they didn't have Weiss do much of anything when she woke up, even though the show is called Ice Queendom. Then in one final, very nice looking fight scene, with my two favorite parts being when Weiss blasts her with dust before encasing her in ice. The effects on her glyph usage have been on point this entire show, and the ice itself also looks absolutely beautiful. And then there's this bit, with Rwby using her snowboard form to carry herself on one of Weiss's blasts, before we get this upward traveling shot with Rwby in pursuit of Blake's nightmare. The animation here was absolutely impeccable. This fight scene ends with Blake killing her nightmare, declaring she killed what she used to be. With that line, Blake has completed her character arc in this show. After this, we get a less cool fight scene as Team Rwby kills the Nightmare Grimm. Special mention to Weiss's very JoJo looking pose while she's blasting it. I do like that they did this as a group instead of one person getting the final hit. After defeating the Grimm, Team Rwby meets up with Jean, Kira, and the Tiny Weisses, where we get some more confused Weiss as her kingdom starts to fade away. Then Weiss finally learns what happened and she is absolutely devastated, her pride crushed. She tells Jean not to tell his teammates. Unfortunately, it's too late for that. And then she makes her teammates promise to never tell anybody, which I guess is a way to explain why no one mentions this massive event in the show. Yang uses her last coin to escape the dream world, and Weiss is met with her worst nightmare, as she is greeted by several people that know what happened to her. Though I get the feeling by the fact that it focused on Pyrrha last, that's who she feared knowing. Because let's be honest, we all know that that's who she was worried about seeing her get possessed by this Grimm the most. At this point, Weiss probably wishes she was dead. I mean, having the girl you have a crush on bear witness is being so embarrassing, that's rough. This scene was great. It was a nice bit of levity to end the show. There's actually more levity here as we have a post-credit scene where Weiss is thoroughly embarrassed hiding in a sheet, which I didn't see until about 5 minutes before recording this, and I absolutely love that. Embarrassed Weiss is adorable. I love that Weiss was more worried about people seeing and knowing about this embarrassing situation than she was about the fact that she almost died. It just shows how much pride Weiss has, or I guess had. This episode, for all intents and purposes, was the finale of the show. It tied up all the storylines and capped off everybody's character arcs that they were going through this season. The next episode will likely be an epilogue, but how did this episode go? Did it stick the landing? I would say for the most part, it did. We finally got that moment where Weiss finally accepted her feelings on the White Fang, and her friendship with Rwby. We saw Blake overcome her hate for the Shindesu company, as well as whatever hold that her past held on her, breaking free from her White Fang past. We saw Rwby finally take her spot as the true leader of Team Rwby, and she finally came to understand Weiss's words. Honestly, I didn't see the nightmare being in their shadows coming. Then we have Yang, who was Yang. This is one of my biggest problems with the show, which is Yang's character arc. As in, she really didn't have one. Unless you count her letting go of her overprotectiveness of Rwby, and accepting that her sister can defend herself. That's really all that changed throughout the season with her. The only misstep in the landing that they had was the way they ended the Weiss and Blake conflict. It didn't feel like they truly canceled each other out, at least on Weiss's side towards Blake. Like, Blake 100% helped Weiss accept her changing attitude towards the Funnists. I mean, she flat out says she doesn't hate all the Funnists, and she isn't to blame for what the humans do. That she wants to change the Sneedust Company. But it never felt like Weiss helped Blake accept that not everybody in the Sneedust Company hates the Faunus. It ends with Yang saving Blake, with Weiss just kinda sitting around in the background. Speaking of that scene though, I love the animation in that fight scene. The sequence when they come together to fight the Nightmare Blake was phenomenal. It's probably the third best looking scene in the show, behind the Emerald Forest one after they kill the Nevermore, and then Weiss summons a snowstorm in episode 8. This episode also finally gave me a scene I've been waiting for fucking ever for, which is the talk between Weiss and her grandfather. This scene was amazing. It gave us more insight into Weiss's childhood, and how she became the person we know today. At least after Team Rwby broke her out of the shell that Jacques forced her into. The end of this episode was perfect too. Weiss's utter despair when she learns what happened was great. Her being way more worried about her pride than Pyrrha knowing what happened is so Weiss. And the after credit scene was absolutely the best way to end this episode. Overall, this episode was a near perfect cap off to this arc. I'd give it a 9.5 out of 10. I can't wait to see what they do in this final episode. I'm assuming with the way the actual episode ends with the best day ever, it's going to be the start of volume 2, and I wonder if they're going to set up a new show. If they do, I can see another show starring Blake, because as we know in volume 2, there's a lot of focus around Blake and the White Fang. We can maybe see more of that, or maybe we can get something with Yang and searching for her mother. That was basically a huge arc of hers that they didn't really show too much of in the first 3 volumes before it's solved in volume 4. But by then, she doesn't really give a shit. She just wants to find her sister. So, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like and consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and see you in the finale. Weegee out.